Welcome to Speedrunner Reviews. In this series I'll be analysing and reviewing games using the mindset of speedrunning. This video will look at the game from three perspectives. First, the casual experience, which is how most people will first play the game. This will look like a condensed standard review. Next we'll discuss the speedrunning experience, including all the interesting tech and how well the game holds up as a speed game. Finally, we'll look at the tool-assisted speedrun, showing what the game looks like when pushed to the theoretical limit. If you already know the game and want to jump straight to the speedrun part, I've left timestamps in the description. Today we're looking at Spy Kids for the Game Boy Advance, which was a platformer movie tie-in game released in 2003. Let me start by taking you back to the early 2000s. We're talking PS2 and GBA. Gaming was getting more advanced. All of a sudden, Pokemon games were named after stones, not colours, and we had memorable characters like this ant guy. You could even use your PS2 with Spy Toy to try and catch Santa on film, putting your presents under the tree. And when you weren't allowed to play any more games for the day, you'd go outside and play grip ball. I only had a little box of VCR tapes that I would binge watch, and one of those movies was Spy Kids. Well, half of Spy Kids, since we accidentally taped over 30 minutes in the middle with another show. It seemed like everyone was talking about Spy Kids, and I watched these movies religiously. I remember having a sick day from school and watching Spy Kids 2 5 times, and then being able to recite every line by the end of the day. Looking back on it now, these movies are pretty cringy, but I was in the target demographic back then. Spy Kids 3D came out in 2003, and it was a huge event. It capitalised on the 3D phase and was one of the first movies I saw in cinemas with the 3D glasses, of course. The whole movie was based on video games, so of course they had to make a video game based on it. The GBA game actually came out on my 7th birthday, and I ended up getting a copy. I was pretty excited to try it out, but pretty quickly felt that something was off. I was used to playing polished games like Sonic Advance and Banjo-Kazooie, but Spy Kids didn't hook me like those games did. This was probably due to the sluggish physics and general lack of polish. Nevertheless, I persisted thanks to my interest in the movie franchise and played through the game several times. Thanks to this, I'm pretty nostalgic for this game, despite its flaws. So let's go over what type of game this is. At heart, it's a platforming game. You have this first zone which consists of 3 levels, and you can run and jump as expected. You have this cool kick attack, and you can also stomp on enemies by hitting down and the kick button. The enemy stomping is something that takes a bit of getting used to, but once you do, it's probably one of the most fun mechanics in the game. It's a pretty fun level to play through. You can also grab up on ledges and stuff like that, and you'll eventually gain more and more abilities through the game. All of a sudden, it becomes a robot fighting game. So you're playing as this one and you're like flying up in the air with these very slow jump physics, and then you're like beating up on robots and collecting their power-ups. There's a pretty hectic boss at the end of these 3 levels, so you really want to collect as many power-ups as you can from these robots, and that actually helps you get through the levels as well, because killing these robots is pretty difficult. After that it goes back to being a platformer, and you're now in a hotter place, so you're with the lava level. You'll get some power-ups, including the super jump, which you can jump higher. You also get this triple punch, which is a stronger attack. You get this rod that you can throw. You get this energy sucker thing, and you get the super slam. So yeah, the power-ups are really fun to play with, and they help you have a bit more in your arsenal to tackle the levels. The jumping and super jumping is a bit weird because you don't get a different height from holding A on your jump. As soon as you tap it, you'll always go the same height. The way you can determine what height you go is whether or not you have super jump selected in the top right there. So if you have it selected, you'll do these high jumps, and if you don't, you'll do the low jumps. That takes a bit of getting used to, as well as the fact that as soon as you kick, you're locked into that jump direction. So you don't want to accidentally go and kick over a pit and then fall through. Especially considering when you're kicking, you can't grab onto ledges like this. Also, the game has racer levels, and they come in between every 3 levels as like a little intermission before it changes mood. These racer levels are pretty fun, but the physics can get a bit janky. You get these boost items which you can use to speed up, but you can often get clipped in the floor and stuff like that. The racing levels are not linear always. You can sometimes have to turn backwards and take other paths and like turn around to go the right way. You don't actually have to beat this other guy in the racing levels too, which is kind of weird, but it makes it a lot easier because you don't have to worry about going fast, you just have to worry about not dying in the racer levels. Boost management is essential, and you also don't want to go up ramps too quickly, otherwise you might fly off to a place that you weren't intending to. So most levels in this game are pretty linear, but there are some complicated bits like this bit where you have to grab the bridge key, and then that lets you open up the bridge later on and get past. If you don't have that key, you just fall straight through and die. Now each lot of 3 levels ends with a boss, and I'll just show the first one here for spoiler reasons, but that's what it looks like. And this boss can be pretty hard to dodge unless you've got the super jump on and you want to jump over it. But this boss really shows some issues with this game, and one of those issues is the hit stun. It can drain pretty much all of your health straight away if you just let it hit you. So because you don't have any iframes, you can just take all that damage and die pretty quickly. You'll be getting a lot of game overs in this game, which is fitting given the name of the game is Spy Kids 3D Game Over. Now this game does have some extra collectibles to find along the way. One thing you can do is find all the characters from the movie, like this one for example, and every character that you get will congratulate you at the end of the game and sort of be in that final area. And you can also pick up these OSS cards, and these are really cool because they unlock some 3D art in the pause menu. Now I hope you brought your 3D glasses with you because we're about to see some epic 3D art. Check this out. Oh yeah. But given the real life limitations of the Game Boy screen, I'm not sure if this effect would have gone over quite as well as the devs intended. The screen was already dark without being backlit, and these 3D glasses tend to make things darker, so it's not the best combo, but it's a nice try. So along with having these cool 3D images, according to the manual, apparently this game had a tie-in with Macca's, and you'd like get secret codes in your Happy Meal and use them to unlock extra content in the game. I actually don't know what any of these secret codes are, so if anyone knows, I'd love to hear and see what it unlocks. So overall, this game has some pretty cool aspects and follows through on its premise. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with a platformer really. I couldn't in good conscience call this a good game, but at the same time, it's not a bad game. It falls somewhere in the middle. They're obviously exploiting the popularity of the movie and they could have made the game more polished, but if you're a fan of the movie franchise, it could be worth giving this game a go and just seeing what it has to offer. It grew on me as a kid, and I felt a bit iffy about it at the start, but ended up really enjoying it. And now that I picked it up speedrunning it, it's actually done kind of the same thing. When I started speedrunning it, I thought it was a big meme and the physics were all janky, but as I got used to the physics and started getting a bit better at some of the more complex sections, I started to enjoy it a lot more. So it's a game that grows on you over time. Just a heads up that the speedrunning section will unavoidably have some spoilers in it. I'll try and keep everything pretty much chronological, so the end of the game should fall towards the end of the speedrunning section. So let's start off this speedrunning section by talking about movement. I'm going to focus on the platformer levels first, and then we'll talk about the other types of levels later on. Walking is a pretty good way to move, but it is a bit slow. It turns out jumping is just slightly faster than walking by a bit. When you jump though, you're going to land on the ground and have a bit of slowdown. Best way to avoid this is to do a kick while you're jumping, and then if you land from a kick, you won't get as much slowdown. You do still get a little bit of slowdown, but it's not the same amount. You can also bounce off enemies using your down stomp. If you hit the ground with a down stomp, you'll see that Junie stops for quite a while before being able to walk again. But if instead you bounce off an enemy using your down stomp, you can basically just keep going through the air and sometimes get up onto ledges that you normally wouldn't be able to jump up onto. The down stomp is basically the quickest way to move, so if you could just keep bouncing off enemies throughout the whole level, you'd be able to get through it as quick as possible. But realistically, you don't always have enemies to bounce off, so you're going to be jumping and kicking as much as you can. You can pull up on ledges like this and you just hold the up button to do that, but realistically if you can skip getting pulled up onto a ledge, you want to skip that where possible, and usually that's where you're using your bouncers or stuff like that. The other issue with kicking to gain a lot of speed is that once you kick, your speed is locked in. So you don't want to be kicking in risky situations and you're always playing that risk. But you can kick as close to the ground as you want, so quite often a good strategy is to jump until you know you'll make the jump and then do a kick right towards the end of the jump, once you know that you're going to land on solid ground. You do have your normal jump like this, but then you've also got your super jump, and you basically want to have super jump on the entire time while you're playing this game. That'll give you a bit more room to make jumps, but remember every time you hit the ground you're going to be slowing down, so if you can be doing super jumps instead of normal jumps, you're going to be on the ground less often. In general, one of the best ways to deal damage is with this rod attack, and you can sort of jump and fire it as well. So whenever you're fighting a boss or something, you just want to keep throwing rods at it. This usually does 2 damage per hit, whereas a punch or a kick or whatever will do 1 damage per hit. The other way you can deal a lot of damage pretty quickly is by like jumping and kicking down onto the boss or whatever, and that'll deal damage basically once per frame, but it's pretty hard to keep that consistent. Now the run we're going to be looking at today is my recent world record at 29:32. My goal was getting the sub 30 for this game, so I was really glad to get this run. When I came to the game originally, there was one other run of it on the leaderboards, and that was a 54:43. And part of how I managed to improve this so much was making the TAS. So I made the TAS of this game first and learned all about the tech in the game, and then used that knowledge to get the speedrun world record. There was also a TAS of this game previously, done in about 26 minutes, but the TAS that I made was about 6 minutes faster than that, just due to some strategy changes that I found. But there aren't too many glitches in this game, so it really is playing it intended for the most part. One thing you'll notice if you do watch through the run is there's no music on, and the reason for that is music causes lag in this game. So I opted to turn that off, and actually turning off sound effects is a tiny bit faster as well, but it's only by a few frames, so I kept sound effects on just so I could hear them in the run to help me line up tricks and stuff, but also for viewers watching the run. So as we make a start into the run, you'll see all the stuff that I was talking about into action. I'm down stomping where I can down stomp on enemies, and I'm kicking to land on the ground. I never want to land on the ground unless I'm landing from a kick. I get up here and go across the level. So these first few levels are pretty much straight platforming. There's not a whole lot to them, but you do want to line up and come up with your routes through the level, because sometimes you can get yourself into situations where you're like falling down in a pit and have to work your way back up. This section here in 1-2 has a little skip. If you jump up on these platforms, you're wanting to climb up and go to the left. So you want to ride on this platform here, and then you can kind of make this jump and grab it just using your super jump. Pretty cool skip, and it saves a little bit of time in this level. Level 1-3 has that bridge key that I mentioned before, but it's literally right in your way, so pretty hard to miss that one. And with the boss, I'm just going to keep using that rod attack on it and try and jump over it as much as possible. I don't really mind if I die here, but I'd rather not, just because it takes a little bit of time to do the death animation. But in terms of lives, we'll be seeing a few game overs in this run all over the place. Now, this game is pretty difficult to keep your lives, especially since you don't have iframes. So in some levels later on, we'll see me intentionally take a game over to get myself back to 3 lives. Because if you lose a life, you just basically come back to where you were standing when you lost a life. Whereas if you lose all your lives, you get a game over and have to start the level again. So if it's a tricky level, I'd rather come in with 3 lives and do it properly. Next level we see is the racer level, and the tech here is whenever you land from a jump, you're going to slow down just like that. I'm going to slow down here on purpose to get this boost, and I'm not going to use the boost for a little while yet. You press the R button to use a boost, and basically it speeds you up to a speed of 6 rather than your normal speed of 4. So I'm going to get 3 boosts here before I use any, and where I'm going to use the first boost is coming up off a ramp, because your height off the ramp is proportional to your horizontal speed. So if you use a boost just before you leave the ramp, you're going to go really high off that ramp. Now you saw because I got really high off the ramp, I was skipping a lot of the other landing ramps there. And because I'm landing on less things, I'm slowing down less often. Now this race is actually against another racer, but you don't even have to beat that other racer to get through it, which is a pretty weird design choice, but it's pretty nice as a speedrun, because if you do mess something up, you might not be able to beat the racer, and at least you don't lose the level because of that. Next level here is the tech levels, and jumping is slow. There is no jump button really, but you can do this booster thing and fly over enemies. So it takes a while to charge up, and once you're moving in the air, you move slower than walking speed, so I do want to stay on the ground as much as possible, but you'll see here that the enemies are kind of in my way and I have to fly over them. Now you can punch enemies to kill them, and that's often a good strategy, but realistically it is a lot faster to fly over. You just run the risk of the enemy hitting you as you're charging up your flying animation. Sometimes you can try and fly over the robots and you won't quite get over the robots, and then they'll get you. And it's just a risk that you might have to take sometimes. There's a lot of hits done knockback here, and it can be a while after you get hit before you can hit another robot, so this is quite an awkward level to learn, but once you get used to the controls, you kind of know when you can get away with flying and when you have to slow down and punch the robots. Sometimes you can get into pretty sticky situations like this one coming up where I'm having to fight 2 robots at the same time, but fighting these robots is worth it, as we'll see shortly. Robots can actually drop their power up, so this guy firing his arm at me, I'm going to get the ability to fire that arm. Now robots will sometimes drop their power up and sometimes won't, and that's based on RNG. I got really lucky in this run to get that arm cannon as early as I did. From there you can select it and use it, and that can be used to kill robots quicker. The arm cannon's twice as powerful as a punch, so you basically only have to hit this robot with 2 arm cannons rather than 4 punches. The other advantage is you can shoot the arm cannon from a lot further away, so it's often a lot safer than just going up and trying to punch a robot. Now this level's kind of sketchy because I'm on 0 lives and I'm kind of low health, so I'm being pretty careful here not to die, because if I do I'll go all the way back to the start of the level, given that I'd get a game over from the 0 lives. Now in level 2-2, I could get through this without losing a life, but it would actually be kind of slow because I'd have to go out of my way to avoid damage. So I'm going to intentionally take a game over here, and that puts me back on 3 lives, which lets me take this level a bit quicker. Now that I'm actually doing this level properly, I'm going to fly over these robots, but this blue one should show you what I mean by sometimes you can't quite get over them too easily. I try and get over that one, but it hits me twice, and then I have to fly over it a lot slower than I intended to. This is the first kind of non-linear level in the game, and you got to kind of go left and down and right here. If you don't know your way through this level, it takes you a really long time, so you want to kind of map out the levels and know where you're going in advance. In fact, there were no maps for this game online when I started tazzing this game, so I wrote a Lewis script to generate the maps myself. Basically what I did was hacked the camera into each position and took screenshots of the levels at each coordinates that I wanted, and then kind of stitched them all together in a program to make one complete image of the level. They're pretty dodgy maps because it still has the HUD in each individual screenshot, and each map is made up of maybe like 200 screenshots, but it works for routing the levels. Now there's a few different types of robots in this level, and one of the really important one are these razor blade robots that drop the razors on the ground. It's not a particularly strong attack, but it's a really good attack because it doesn't take long to pull it off, and you can basically lay the razor blades and then let them mow down all the robots in your path. So it's a really good one for killing robots from a distance and not taking too much damage. Now I killed 3 of those razor robots there, and none of them dropped the razor power up, so that was a bit of a bummer and I got kind of bad luck there. But it kind of makes sense because I got good luck on the missiles earlier on in the first part of this. Towards the end of this level are these flames that come out of the ground, and you do have to slowly fly over them. This is pretty inconvenient, but if I took damage on each one I'd be losing so many lives that I'd risk getting a game over here, so it's definitely not worth it. I will mention here that I'm dying a lot in this level, but if you've never played this game it might not make sense. If you do try it out, you'll feel how sluggish and janky these controls are, so it's pretty hard not to die. I could get through the level without dying if I strategically got power-ups and sort of kept my distance, but it would be really slow, so it's a lot quicker to just take the deaths, and then when you're getting too close to 0 lives, refresh and get the game over to get yourself back to 3. So skipping straight ahead to the end of the 3rd level of the robots, and I haven't got any razor blades yet until now. That's literally the last robot I could have killed to try and pick up a razor blade, and luckily it dropped it. Now it would have been nice to have it earlier, but we'll see why it's so useful in this boss fight coming up. Missiles are stronger against the boss, but if you drop these razor blades, it basically hit stuns the boss so that they can't do anything. So it's a really good strategy for RTA. It would be a bit quicker with missiles, but you take a lot more deaths with the missiles, so that would slow it down unless you were in a Taz setting. After the robot levels, we have another racer level. So the races sort of happen in between all the regular levels. I really need to slow down and get this boost here, because you need to boost off this little ramp bit to get up here. Without the boost, I'm pretty sure it's impossible to get up there and actually complete the level. You also need to jump over this gap, which I mess up here. There is a boost down in that gap, so it's not as bad as it looks, but I really should have made that jump over. So this racer level is actually the most complicated one, and if you don't know where you're going, it can be really easy to get stuck and lose a bunch of time. There's a lot of areas like this one where you have to go left, and then you need to know where to turn around and go right again, just like this bit here. There's this section here where if you don't slow down on these ramps, you will actually fall off and die. So I turn left and right again there to completely kill my speed. And your lives here are actually the same lives that you have in the platformer and robot levels. So I'm on 0 lives right now. If I fell in that hole, I would die and lose the run. You'll notice me end the level on 2 boosts here, and you might be wondering why I didn't use the boosts, and the answer is they actually carry over onto the next racer level, which will be in a few levels time. Now after the racer we have the lava levels, and this follows the same platforming physics and controls as the original platformer levels did. I'm taking an intentional death there to get my lives back to 3 because these levels are extremely easy to die on. 3-3, even when you come into it with 3 lives to start with, it's still really hard not to get a game over in that level. And you'll see that the run that I'm comparing against is a 36-minute time, and this is a 29-minute run. Most of that time save just came from not game overing in 3-3. Now a huge gimmick of these lava levels are the surfboards that's coming up. So you basically want to get on these and they travel at the same speed that you can jump at. So as long as you can jump without slowing down, you'll be able to get back onto the surfboards. But we'll see here that I jump onto this platform, and with the enemy and block in my way, I do lose the surfboard. You'll get another surfboard come soon enough, and then you can jump on that and continue your cycle. With the surfboards, you generally have to duck under roofs, so you basically just want to hold down and right every time you're on the surfboard. You can skip a lot of the terrain this way, but there are some platforms that you actually have to jump over. And getting back on the surfboard is really difficult. As soon as the surfboard is on any type of slope, you usually don't hit the surfboard, but instead you hit the lava underneath and miss the surfboard completely. The other factor is if you kick during your jump and try and land on the surfboard, quite often you'll go through the surfboard then. So to get on the surfboard, you basically want it to be on flat ground and just gently walk off onto the surfboard. And if you hit the lava, you'll take a damage and pretty quickly you'll be dead. Level 3-2 is a bit trickier than 3-1, and the level is basically a big loop. So you start on the top left, then you go all the way to the right, drop down, and then you go all the way to the left again. So if we could find a way to clip through the floor or something at the start, you'd actually be able to skip this entire level. I do lose the surfboard here, and you have to strategically jump over, I think that's your mum character, so that you don't get a little cutscene. But I don't need the surfboard to get to the next section because you can just jump up here and grab the health upgrade while you're waiting for the next cycle. Now the surfboard section was fairly easy to do once you get used to it, but when you drop down and go left, this is where the level takes a real step up in difficulty, and it's where you're going to start getting a lot of game overs with this game. So you have a narrow corridor where you have to kill a bunch of enemies, and then you have a very few small platforms with a lot of blind jumps. So given that you can't really see the platform as you're jumping down onto it, you have to kind of know where these are, or you need to like duck down and have a look below before you actually commit to the jumps. Doing these quickly is really difficult, and sometimes you'll get rocks falling from the roof and hitting you during your jumps. So if you're pretty unlucky, you're going to get hit by those rocks and they'll completely throw you off. I was fairly lucky during this run that I didn't get hit, but the Taz had a pretty rough time with the cycles and avoiding all those. Now, as soon as you fall into any pits, you're going to lose a life instantly, so it's important to come into this level on like 2 or 3 lives, unless you're feeling really confident with it. I conveniently didn't lose lives here, which was really nice, but it took a lot of practice to know where all the platforms are going to be before committing to those jumps. Now level 3-3 is probably the hardest level in the run. If I didn't have 3 lives here, I'd be getting a game over to try and come back on 3 lives. You have to get another bridge key in this level, so you need to go up and left to grab that, otherwise you pretty much can't get across. So we're going to ride these platforms up to the left as a little detour at the start of the level to grab that key. One thing that makes this level really hard is you have the blind jumps on the very thin platforms, but then it also starts combining that with a lot of enemies. Pretty soon we're going to see a bat enemy, which will be happening at the same time we're trying to jump onto these thin platforms. Very tricky. And remember, if you try and attack that bat in the air, you're going to have to kick, and kicking locks you into your movement direction. So if you happen to be holding right when you kick that bat, you're probably going to be flying to the right and fly straight past the platform you're trying to land on. A small thing to mention about jump height in this game, so if you're kicking, your hitbox is smaller. So you'll see me jumping up to the roof, and then when I kick, Genie kind of snaps up a little bit into the roof. If you don't kick, then your jump is going to be bounded by that roof and go a bit lower, but if you want a slightly higher jump, you can kick so that Genie goes into the roof. Now this section here is what makes the level difficult. These fireballs will come up and quite often will hit you if you're on the surfboard. So if you're just unlucky, you're going to get hit, and it's really hard to get back on the surfboard. And those aren't the only fireballs. I actually do get hit by a couple up here, and there's pretty much nothing you can do to avoid that. That means I have to wait for the next surfboard cycle. I basically jump across the lava here because there's so many of those fireballs that can hit you on this surfboard and knock you off that it's honestly just better to run across the lava to get past that section. Now the end of this level should show you how tricky it is. I'm about to drop down to 0 lives and start losing a bunch of health. I am trying to go pretty quick by skipping this surfboard, but even then it's pretty scary. If I lost that last life, I'd be getting a game over and going back to the start of the level and the run would be pretty much dead. I am going to take a game over intentionally in this boss though, because there's no way I'm beating it on 1 health, and if you get a game over you just go back to the start of the boss fight anyway. The boss has a pretty consistent cycle. You just hit it with 2 of these rod attacks and then it hits the ground, and then once it hits the ground you can hit it with another 2 rods again. The only kind of awkward thing is it sometimes shoots fireballs and deals damage to you like that, so you want to try and avoid those. But realistically I don't bother avoiding it in this run because it doesn't matter if I take damage here too much, so I just tank the hits and keep trying to hit it as quickly as possible. The last racer level is actually a little bit easier than the second one for some reason. It's just more linear. I do a little skip off this ledge coming up here. I have to use 2 boosts in the air, and that gets me on top of that platform, which skips a pretty chunky section of the map. And the racer ends with this kind of fun loop around to the finish line. I was pretty happy with how this racer went in the run, especially at the end of a pretty good run with no game overs or anything. So just a heads up, the final boss is coming up after this racer, so if you don't want to see that, feel free to skip ahead a couple minutes. So with the racer done, we're going to come into the final boss, and it starts off with kind of an enemy rush. You have to kill 40 enemies as quick as you can. There's sort of a hard cap on how quickly you can do this because you have to wait for them to come on screen. The best thing to do is to use the super stomp ability, and that's like your normal ground poundy stompy attack, although it's a much stronger and you don't bounce up off enemies. The other thing you'll notice is when I use it, the enemies are freezing, and that's sort of the whole like ground pound the ground really hard and you freeze the enemies which are around you kind of thing. Now this boss is vulnerable on its head, but it's kind of hard to get up there. You have to jump on the hand and probably fire off one of those rod attacks, but if you keep attacking the hand's actually going to get defeated and die. So I'm going to do that here, but I'm on some pretty concerning health at the moment. So I thought I might have been able to make it killing the boss on this 4 health that I had left, so I fire off a few rods, but unfortunately I did get hit by these shoulder bullets too many times and lost. I didn't think that I was going to be able to beat the boss here, but this is pretty much the quickest way that you can die anyway, so I thought I might as well go for beating the boss. This is probably one of the biggest improvements on the run potentially, and that would be just coming into this boss fight with more lives so that I didn't have to get a game over and restore those lives. So once you beat the boss, you're going to come into this cutscene area and all your family members and cast members will be waiting for you. But since I didn't save any in this run, there's nobody in that area. So basically once you hit start to skip that area, the run is completed. I was pretty happy with how this run turned out, in all honesty. It was really fun trying to grind down this category a bit. There's definitely a lot more room for it to come down, but I was happy with how I went, and honestly, to have a run with not many unintentional game overs, or really basically no unintentional game overs, I was pretty happy, especially since it made the run come down by about 7 minutes. If you're thinking about picking up this game, I would really recommend it. Although it's a kind of janky game physics-wise, and it's not the most polished game in the world, it is pretty fun to speedrun. Once you learn where all the platforms are and where to jump and everything, it can be really satisfying pulling it off without dying, and seeing that you can get through the levels without getting game overs anymore. The other really nice thing about speedrunning this game is there are basically no cutscenes or waiting times or anything. So realistically, you're just playing the game for a solid 29 minutes. You're not waiting around very much. And it's pretty quick to restart attempts as well. So I'd recommend giving it a go. It's fun and there's probably potential to grind down the world record a bit more if you're keen to do that. So the TAS was made pretty recently and clocks in at 1959. I was very satisfied that it was just under 20 minutes. I did turn off music and sound effects in the Taz, whereas in the Speedrunner I only turned off music. Turning off sound effects saves a tiny bit more time, so I wanted the Taz to be optimal. Unfortunately, it does impact on the entertainment a bit watching the Taz, but I really wanted to save those valuable frames. So this Taz is what kicked me off my speedrunning journey in this game. I did the Taz first and then RTA. As you can see from the footage here, it's pretty similar gameplay apart from just being a bit more optimized with the movement and like knowing where I'm going to land and everything. But we'll see a few differences as the Taz goes on. I didn't mention it in the speedrunning bit, but my favorite trick is coming up. It's called Grandpa Jump here. And basically just jump over the grandpa. If you hit him, you'll get a cutscene saying like, thanks for saving me or whatever. But it's obviously a bit faster to skip that. And if you keep your eye on the mushroom enemy just after the grandpa, you'll see me get pushed out of that enemy to the right. Should be coming up about now. There we go. So there's a lot of that in the Taz. If you can kind of get into an enemy's hitbox, it'll eject you out. And if it ejects you the way you want to go anyway, that's a bit of a time save there. So one of the first main differences we see is the first boss fight. Usually once you deal a certain amount of damage, it locks you out from doing any more and then starts its attacking cycle. But with the Taz, I managed to get clipped into the boss a bit doing a kick and do a whole bunch of damage in one go. So rather than taking probably 7 or 8 cycles like an RTA, I can kill this boss in just 3 cycles in the Taz. The racer sections are far more optimized in the Taz than they ever could be in RTA. There's a lot of delicate stuff you're balancing with your speed, and by slowing down in strategic places, you can have less big jumps and boosts off ramps, meaning that you slow down less when you land. The Taz had to route out its boosts really carefully, and it does it in similar spots to RTA, but I can use boosts in the exact spot that I want to make sure that I'm basically not landing from jumps as much as possible. In the robot levels, we're going to be doing the same thing we did before and minimize flying as much as possible. But there's a little glitch when you walk off a platform, which we'll see here. You do a little short hop and then land on it again, and then you can walk off as per normal. And that means the time that you spent flying is reduced even further because you're spending most of that falling time walking instead, which puts you at full speed. You'll see me being able to fly over enemies pretty flawlessly, and that's because I can manipulate whether or not they're going to attack me and also like which direction they're going to attack. I will look for a power up for one of these enemies, which we'll see shortly. So I'm about to come across the first enemy which can possibly fire these missiles, and this is the first one that can drop a power up, and as we'll see, I'm going to get a power up from that enemy. The reason I even bother getting that power up is because it's faster for the boss at the end, but also coming up pretty shortly there'll be a robot that we actually need to kill to get past because the roof is too low. Unfortunately, you can't use this missile power-ups on those short blue robots. The reason for that is just because they're too short to hit with the missile, but we will be able to use it to save a whole bunch of time, so it's definitely worth grabbing. Now you might be wondering how that missile power-up is manipulated. I said before it was RNG and it kind of comes all down to luck, but what it's actually dependent on is how many robots you've killed in that level, but also how many times you've punched in this level. So by doing a few punches at the end of this boss fight, I can line up the RNG to make that robot drop the item. You saw I did 3 punches there, that's because that's what it took to line up the item. And that's something that I can plan out in advance, and it's something that's consistent. So potentially in RTA speedruns, we could do a manipulation to always get the ideal drop from that robot just by doing a few strategic punches. So that's definitely an improvement possible in RTA. So there's not a whole lot else I can really say about these robot levels. I'm often opting not to fight the robots, and that's purely just because it's slow to launch off your weapons, although sometimes I have to because it's unavoidable with the roof situation. I'll often land just behind robots and get pushed out with a little boost, and that'll save a bit of time in those situations. I mentioned in RTA that I wanted to get the item from that chainsaw buzzsaw ground robot. That's not the case in the Taz. Because the missiles are stronger, they're a lot better to use on the boss. And the reason you want the buzzsaw in RTA is because it's easier to hit things from a distance and a bit safer, but in a Taz where you can play perfectly, you don't really need it as much. So I'm going to skip straight to the boss of this area, and you'll see me use a lot of missiles on it. These are a lot stronger than the buzzsaw, so while you have the disadvantage of not hit stunning the robot as much, you do have the advantage of doing more damage more quickly. I manipulate the robot to use this hammer attack here and keep hitting the ground, and and that lets me get off a lot of hits really quickly. I did have to make sure I had a lot of health coming into this fight because there's not really much way to avoid taking damage there. Coming into the second racer level, we have similar optimization. If I'm coming off a big ramp, I'll often want to slow down so that I don't get too much of a boost off it. You'll also see that whenever I'm landing on the ground, I'm not happening to do too many bounces unless I really can't avoid it. And the reason for that is when you land and get a bounce, it's going to be slower because you're technically landing twice. So that takes a bit of manipulation with your speed, but it's pretty easy to pull off. There's also that really quick turnaround on that ramp there, which is a lot faster than what I could do in RTA. And that's basically 2 quick turnarounds to achieve that, because whenever you turn around, your speed completely zeroes off, unless you're already in the air. So these volcano levels are pretty similar to RTA, and a lot of it is capped on a cycle. For example, this platform here I have to wait for anyway. But the key difference is this surfboard section. I can keep the same surfboard all the way through this. And given that the surfboard travels at your maximum speed, there's not really any way to make this faster apart from just keeping the same surfboard the whole way. It was really tricky getting some of these jumps where I kept the surfboard, but I eventually got it and managed to make it through all the sections while keeping it. Moving on to 3-2, we're going to see some much more efficient enemy killing using this staff, and that's a much faster way to get through that corridor. This section gave me some absolute grief with the falling rocks, and they kept hitting me as I was falling down, which obviously slowed me down a bit, and I barely just missed this platform cycle coming up. So this one you can see I can pretty much almost make it onto that platform and jumping off, but I have to wait for it to go all to the right and then back all the way to the left and make that jump. I spent literally a whole day trying to make that cycle quicker because it would have saved a lot of time, but I never got it in the end, and that's one of the things that was pretty frustrating about this TAS. But realistically, there's not much I could have done because I optimized it as much as I could and just couldn't make that cycle. Sometimes it happens. Alright, moving on to 3-3, and we're actually going to see our first and only proper glitch in the run. You'll notice that I skipped getting the key for that bridge. Normally the key is kind of up and left. And what we're going to do instead is use an enemy to kind of make that jump across possible. You've seen me bouncing off enemies before, so I'm going to lure one of these bat enemies near the bridge and bring it across and help me get a bounce. It's going to be this bat here. I go to the left to stop it charging to the left, and then I lure it to the right. You'll notice this takes quite a while, so it's only barely faster than grabbing the key. I clip it through the platform there, get a bounce off, and we can grab the other side. So I think that saves something like 10 frames, which for reference is about 0.2-ish seconds. But I was really glad that it was just slightly faster, because in my opinion it's a bit cooler and fun to have in the run like that. Now this boss fight is pretty similar to RTA. You can get 2 rod hits off on him every cycle, except there is some cycles where you can get slightly more. We'll see a one soon where I get 4 hits, and that was really satisfying to pull off. That's not really consistent to do in RTA though. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 there speeds up the fight quite a bit. Last thing I'll mention is the Toy Maker fight. You saw previously I killed the arm to use it as a platform and make my way up, but with some high jump swapping to rods you can do this without killing the arm at all. You just have to be really careful to dodge all the projectiles and everything. So the thing that makes that tricky to do in RTA is you have to have the high jump selected to jump high enough and then quickly swap to the rod and use it. It's probably possible to pull off, but honestly it's just a bit quicker to kill the arm for me, so that's what I went for. So that's going to be all for the TAS and all for this video. If you enjoyed this content, then a subscription is always appreciated, and I hope you got a bit out of it and learned a bit about the game. Thank you for watching.